Lingua Brutallica is a podcast that uses ethnographic interviews to study language use in the extreme metal community. We are studying a music scene known for its love of themes and topics generally considered offensive, and it is likely that some episodes will touch on topics or opinions some listeners may find tasteless or ethically problematic. Ethnographic researchers aim to adopt the interviewee's point of view so that we can draw out and study the attitudes, beliefs, and practices that are important to them. We want to make it clear that in presenting these conversations here, we do not endorse any of their content. Our aim is to explore the thought processes behind language use in this long-running, international, and yet understudied scene. Welcome back to Lingua Brutallica with me, Jess Crook, and my co-host, Wes Robertson.
Hello.
Today we're interviewing Paul Masvidal of Cynic. Thanks for making time to chat to us, Paul.
Thanks for having me.
So just to start off, as we always do, how would you describe Cynic's music to somebody that was familiar with metal but hadn't heard you before? What kind of genre would you say that it falls under and why?
I've always struggled with that. I think in the early days, we identified as being like extreme progressive type of music. And, over the course of 3 decades, I think we decided we were sui generis, kind of just a hybridized kind of mix of everything without trying to fit into a particular genre. I think a progressive rock or metal person would hear us as that thing, and other people will hear. So it's kind of a variety of stuff depending on, the song. Mm-hmm. And I think that the task of Cynic has always been to try and do something new and break the mold and bring something new to the table and do something that's kind of without category and maybe a new thing, just break out of, because it's so easy to rip each other off and I feel like the originality is scarce in this scene, especially in like the rock and metal community. And so I always felt it was like, how do I break out of all of that and go in the most unorthodox direction possible and bring something new to the table, which I think is the duty of any artist really, is to kind of expand and inspire other artists and show that there's other ways to do things rather than just rip off people you admire, So it's kind of a hybrid. I don't really know if I like to think of it as genreless, but if you hear certain songs and you hear growls, you're going to call it death metal. If you hear other songs, I think it's ambient or experimental rock. But again, it's like we love to put things in boxes and categories, and I love to just step out of them as much as possible. So,
somewhat kind of provocatively, Encyclopedia Metallum describes Cynic in 3 stages, calling you thrash metal early, progressive death metal / fusion mid, and now progressive rock later. Do you align with this, or do you think it's kind of a bit weird to not call you a metal band?
I mean, that's cool how, everyone's going to do their thing with it. Right. And for me, it's kind of like, if they want to call it that, that's everyone's, we're all subjectively kind of experiencing and hearing things, and sad songs can sound happy to somebody and a happy song can sound sad to someone else, depending on where they're at. So I'm down with whatever works, whatever, it's all good with me.
So how about when you first started getting into metal music? Like, were you initially attracted to a diversity of different subgenres, or was there one in particular that you gravitated towards?
I think I was all over the place. I was an eclectic kind of kid. I started out playing classical guitar, and I ended up kind of in a, getting into classic rock via my older brother. And then I ended up kind of diving deeper into just going more extreme with extreme forms of metal, which was really kind of the early days of Metallica and Slayer and all that stuff. And then it just I went further down that rabbit hole, getting into tape trading and all the kind of variations of extreme metal that were happening. So also, while at the same time, I was listening to like, I started to get into fusion and jazz and pop music. And so I was kind of all over the place. And I think we all were, especially, I mean, I still am, but in the early days, I always joke, it's like while we were making Death's Human, we were listening to everything but death metal. It was all like, all about fusion and jazz and like experimental pop. And I think that's probably why it lends itself to being something more original and refreshing, because we're kind of pulling from sources that aren't doing that stuff, so it's like our references are outside the box.
When you were first getting into metal and listening to metal, especially the more extreme stuff, did you pay attention to the lyrics at all? Like, do you have a moment where like, oh, this is kind of how language is used in metal solidified for the first time in your mind?
Yeah, I wasn't really that impressed with the lyrics. I guess there were certain bands that maybe spoke to me more than others, like Tom Warrior from, Celtic Frost. Like, I think he was really writing some interesting things. And there was other people out there that were kind of getting into a little bit more layered stuff rather than just trying to sound evil or masculine, I mean, we were coming at it from such a different direction. I think that we had to find something authentic that we could identify with. So it was just immediately kind of, again, went totally non-typical metal starting. I think the early days, the demos pre-Focus, I was really kind of into political things and just very like against the system and rebelling against kind of the ways of the world. I guess I still am to a degree, but I was very much interested in writing about that, like how screwed up the world is and how we're in trouble and all that stuff. So I think I shifted when I started to look inward into a more kind of philosophical approach to lyrics rather than externalizing.
So, like, broadly speaking, there's kind of been a long-running debate in scholarship on metal about whether or not it's all like the lyrics are all just kind of play, like kind of the horror movie style thing, or if it's something that reflects sort of the author's intent. Would you say that your approach has more been towards reflecting the self in a way?
I guess like it's funny because when you say the self, I'm like, what's the self? Right. So
Sure,
it's like
sure.
almost like the what's beyond the self, and always kind of more digging into existential questions about who am I beyond this identity and this person. Like I think I had moments of writing about kind of life experiences in terms of real-time things like relationships and stuff like that. And I've done that with a lot of the more like acoustic type music and and those other types of projects. But with Cynic, it really kind of from the get-go was almost like about kind of going beyond the ego and the identification with the self and kind of tapping into something that was more, I guess, spiritual. It was just trying to understand reality from a different point of view and not necessarily from the eyes of like a personality. And so I always felt like the lyrics were coming through me versus like from me. It was almost like, who is this? And what is this? What am I trying to say? And who is the I in that? So it was always this like dismantling of identity that was at work with Cynic's music. I think it was always kind of going deeper into trying to look a little bit below the surface of identity and form and trying to understand who I was. And a lot of it, especially those early days, beginning with Focus, not only was I actively like diving into a hardcore meditation practice, but I was also experimenting a lot with psychedelics, and so that combo platter will just rip you out of any conceptual structure of how you think you understand reality, right? It was just like kind of, whoa, I don't know what's going on here kind of thing, which is really humbling and cool. So it lends itself to a lot of that kind of approach to lyrics where everything's kind of a question, you know, and but it really depends on the song and the record. I feel like every record is also a snapshot of inner to outer experience. So a reflection of what's going on externally, but kind of putting it in this like big kettle, you know, and a big soup, and just like mixing it up with all these kind of existential ideas and then trying to kind of unravel. I mean, I don't really, it's never like a literal thing. You know what I mean? You can ask me about songs and I'll tell you, I think, a reference point based on where it was coming from. But for the most part, it's always like more of an existential kind of look at what's going on from like a passenger, you know, like trying to kind of observe. But there were moments where there was the I or the me involved in some of the lyrics. And so it just depends, really.
So given that you have this kind of very non-traditional approach to music, and you've drawn on all these kind of diverse inspirations, like from within metal and outside of that, we're wondering, why is it then that you've still kind of returned to metal, at least on kind of a general level, to do this kind of experimental work with your music? Like, what is it about metal that makes it a suitable vehicle for that kind of experimentation?
Well, what I found, especially in the early days, was that with coming up in Miami, and we were part of the Florida scene, which was mostly Central Florida, is the bands were so extreme and so experimental that I felt like metal was the one space where you could break all the rules and not necessarily, it was still under the umbrella maybe, but the whole definition of progressive especially was about breaking out of anything that's right. You're being progressive. So it's like, think of the meaning of that word. So it's kind of like metal gave us this space to just not have boundaries, not fit in boxes. And it produced a lot of interesting extreme music that now has been copied, and you have all these variations on a theme. Like, you know, you have the whole gent genre that was birthed from a Meshuggah essentially, but look at even certain riffs from bands, even Cynic and other bands, there's genty moments, and you can think that, oh, Meshuggah took that idea and just built a whole world out of it, in the same way that like people took one Beatles song and built an entire genre out of it, you know, like,
sure.
Or, and you know, there was like genres birthed out of one song. So I feel like that's at work, and it just felt boundaryless, like, you know, especially growing up with bands like Atheist and Cynic, we were really kind of riding on each other, just being as outside as possible. And we still had the angst. And I think what was so cool about the metal stuff is that you could be extremely visceral. You can just like get into this incredible dynamics that was like at the level of classical music, right? Just like super aggressive, super dissonant. And then you can make real beauty too, and kind of calm and spaciousness. So it was like one of the few genres where you can hold all of that and still be somewhat in it, I guess.
So you mentioned this freedom, but obviously, especially in the early 1990s scene, a lot of bands did kind of tend, I guess it was a box that they put themselves in, but, you know, to just discuss gore, right? Discussions of gore and violence became almost a trope that ironically kind of boxed people in a little bit. But you've avoided this from the beginning. Like if we go all the way back to Focus, the closest thing to a reference to violence is the fall of a sparrow attending to the slightest scratch of flesh. And that's continued to be pretty absent in your work. But we've read interviews with you where you mentioned touring with like Cannibal Corpse and people throwing bottles at you because they didn't get it. And so we're wondering, like, way back in the day, did you feel pressure to stop what you're doing, or like that you're doing something odd? Did you feel that, oh, my life would be easier if I just kind of sung about zombies and murder and death? And kind of following off that, did you ever hear comments that felt that kind of an approach to lyrics like inspire us to build a new world, one in which famine, disease, and ignorance will be only memories of a dismal past, wasn't metal enough and was too hopeful for the genre?
Yeah, I mean, it was not easy. writing about these things because we were highly criticized. And I don't remember a lot of reviews where they understood what the lyrics were about. It was like, who do these people think they are? There was a lot of that. Like, well, how dare they? Like, what are they? How pompous? How it was just a lot of like, basically like, you can't do that in metal. You can't do that. And so you had all these gatekeepers that wanted to keep us in the box, and especially coming from having played with death and more extreme bands, people were just like, wait a second, vocoder and these weird lyrics. And so it was really challenging, actually. And yeah, I mean, I never, I was a gay man, and I had already opened and out to myself. And not to say you can't be gay and full of aggression, but I was more connected to like a different part of my psyche, and essentially my like how I existed in the world, that was less fueled by aggression and more fueled by beauty. I wanted to see beautiful things. Cynic were wearing, Indian garb, like baggy pants and colorful clothes. Like, we didn't fit in the way that in any way, so we were breaking the rules like all the way around, and it was extremely challenging for us. I mean, that's partially why we broke up. I mean, we felt completely misunderstood, and we gave this record everything we had, and we felt like, holy shit, no one likes us, other than like a couple shows here and there. It was hard. It was really hard out there. And I can't tell you, I mean, even on Traced in Air, we had tours where people were screaming, faggot, like festivals or whatever. There's still so much of that going on in the scene, and it's more like below the radar now. It's not like outspoken. Back then it was so masculine and male, and we never quite like identified with that. We weren't, not that we were trying to be like femme or something. We were just kind of, in some ways, genderless. We were just being ourselves. It was like, it wasn't about being this tough guy. That's why I was so careful when someone would ask me, oh, what kind of music do you play? Because back then, especially if you said metal, they immediately think masculine, cheesy, like, you know what I mean? And it was like, no, we're not that kind of metal, like it's like, we're nerdy and weird and experimental, and it gets heavy, but it's not like, so like, I even remember the growling on Focus, the goal was to make it like heart-driven growl rather than like angry. It was from the heart, So it's that kind of thinking that I think kept us always removed a little bit and made it the path more difficult. They say, like, as an artist, if you're going to carve your own, what's that Emerson quote, right? Like, go where there is no path and make your own trail, whatever. But what happens is there's a lot of thorns on that path, and you get cut up, and it's extremely painful. And that's why, this band has been rife with hardship, essentially. And I hate to kind of put it in, have that story around it, but it's true. I mean, we had a very difficult beginning. We were barely understood. We had little pockets of some support, but for the most part, it was tough. And then we broke up. We were so like over it. We felt so disconnected from the scene, and we realized we wanted to do other kinds of music and experiment. But then, we came back and we realized, holy shit, like, it's come a long way, especially by Traced in Air, thanks to other bands that kind of followed our lead, and other bands as well, like an Atheist and even like the Meshuggahs that kind of experimented. They kind of set a precedent, although I would say Meshuggah's very, like,
sure,
that's some tough stuff, but yeah, it got better. And I remember people saying to me, the scene's different now. It's not what it used to be, like. And I was really scared, actually, to come back in. It was Kelly Shaver from Atheist calling me, who was doing these reunion tours in like 2007, saying, you got to get out there. People care about Cynic. And I was like, really? They care? And so it was a series of synchronicities. And then we ended up, I kind of heeded the echo, essentially, of these synchronicities. And said, okay, I think I can do this again. And what I found was it was so in my DNA, this kind of music, and this, it was part of my whole childhood up until early 20s. So it was like, it was so, you know, we started really young. So it was kind of already just integrated. So back when we got back together, it was like, oh yeah, this is natural, you know. It was, but how do we push it further? How do we take it somewhere else? But it definitely felt like it was already in my biology, the understanding of that music. And I grew up, I mean, and now more than ever, I connect with the metal scene, and I understand, and I see how many great artists there are and how expanded it is and how much interesting music is going on, and with the high degree of musicianship involved. It's incredible. Like it's a really intense genre. There's a lot of great musicians out there. And again, I keep saying genre, but it's like, you know, it's that umbrella, right? Because it can be so many things. And Cynic is so many things. It's pulling from all of that. So now I come back and I go, yeah, I have a metalhead in my bones, you know, and I'm proud of it. I'm actually really proud of and connected to that. And it's part of my history and part of who I am. So I identify with it in a cool way. You know, it's like I've had to kind of go full circle.
So would you say maybe metal is finally getting close to actually fulfilling the potential for like pure freedom that it kind of advertised back in the day?
I think so. I mean, it was back then. I mean, people like, I remember like David Vincent from Morbid Angel doing an interview back in the day saying, we can do whatever we want. And that's the beauty of what we're doing. And I was like, that's right. You know, like that's the whole idea, is that we don't want to be put in a box. So I think the bands that were responsible for kind of creating these subgenres within the metal community, which is like the Cynics, the Morbid Angels, the Deaths, the Atheist, the Meshuggah, we were kind of all about that, the freedom in the space and being extremely original. Like we were trying to really do our own thing and not copy each other. And so it was, but now of course you have all these like sub versions of all that stuff, and once in a while there's a fresh one that's like, ooh, that's different, you know, that's a new hybrid. But a lot of it is still kind of these variations on a theme that have already happened. And it's really hard to make something new. You have to get out of your comfort zone. You have to push yourself out of your cocoon. You have to do things differently. You have to go with the unorthodox ideas. It's hard to do that. It's hard to trust yourself as in any form of art, really, to kind of go where no one else is going and trust that it actually will find itself and find a language. And so there's a lot of rebellion in that, which is very appealing. You know, there's, again, it kind of connects to this whole idea of like rebellion and breaking the rules and pushing out of your safety.
Well, you can definitely see a lot of those kind of experimental themes like embedded in your lyrics, which we do want to kind of unpack in a little bit more depth. I mean, you've mentioned several times your own experiences with, you know, spirituality, experimentation with psychedelics, you know, you doing meditation, and you've also mentioned, you know, your Indian influences, not just in terms of your attire, but you can see that in your lyrics as well. Like if you look at the lyrics in Focus, you know, there's a lot of, you know, presence of concepts of Indic and Vedic spiritualities, you know, with the Veil of Maya, you know, being the most obvious, you know, example, the song's title being a reference to Indian philosophies regarding Maya, which blocks perception of the true nature of things. And including reference to ahamkara, or the identification of the self with impermanent things. The album also references celestial voyages, cosmic mothers, and the concept of a cosmic sea and a world egg. So what inspired you know, your repeated focus on these particular ideas and philosophies?
Well, back in the Focus days, I was really kind of deep into Hinduism and the Bhagavad Gita and all the books of the Gita and the Mahabharata. And I was just deep into all that stuff. And so I was really pulling from it. You know, I was pulling from like those sources as inspiration and practicing those practices. And I think it was the late 90s that I got exposed to Buddhism. And that's when it shifted for me, and I got into a kind of a different trajectory in terms of a spiritual practice. But I think a lot of it was rooted in this combo platter of meditation. Like, I mean, I think about almost every record, there's a song about a guided meditation that I've created for myself, some journey into the mind, and there's a whole world. And so there's like all these practices that represent aspects of purification, essentially, how to kind of cleanse yourself, or how to reach kind of higher states of consciousness. And so there was that stuff at work, and it's kind of, there's so much, really. It's all like a big pool of this stuff. I mean, I think if you go each record by Trace Denaire, which was, it's 2007, 2008, I was more, it's very Buddhist, and also like, kind of threaded with this, a lot of impermanence and, like those kinds of Buddhist ideas, but kind of cloaked in the story of an extraterrestrial. It's like, so there's like all these kind of, there's always this like sub conceptual thing going on that sometimes I don't really even understand what it is till later. And that happens with a lot of Cynic's music, where so much of it is just you're showing up for a process, so you're kind of used, you're just like a vessel for some information. And then it's not till later, after the record's done or years later, that I go back and go, oh, that's what that's about. I thought it was about this. But do you know what I mean? It's almost so impersonal at the same time. You think it's like, that's why I'm so careful to talk about very specifically what a song is about, because sometimes I don't even know. I feel like I'm just more, again, of being an observer and taking note of some experience or a state of consciousness, and then trying to document it. And a lot of times the lyrics are just going hand in hand with the music. It's not like, Cynic has never been like singer, and then the riffs. It's like the vocals are kind of embedded in the music. So it's all like this one, everything's kind of informing the other. So it's not trying to be this overlay on the music. It's kind of all connected. And a lot of times the lyrics are referencing what's going on in the music in terms of trying to kind of merge that environment so they feel very seamless.
Well, speaking of this kind of reflection on themes that comes later, when we were looking at the lyrics on your first album, we did notice that there's a large number of references to water, liquids, and related items. Like you discuss people thirsting, there's the molten liquid of penance, calmless in a mental lake, rafts and boats and canoes, rivers, streams, and goblets all appear. There's a song titled I'm But a Wave to, Truth's Modest Waters. And then perhaps the most watery of the lines is my raft filled with delusive wastewater shall be drained by holes of wisdom, a celestial voyage to reach the shores and bathe in pools of divine nectar, off the song Celestial Voyage. Thinking now, what was kind of the purpose of all these liquid and water metaphors running throughout this release?
Probably just growing up by the ocean. I grew up in Miami, and in Miami, Florida, and we were always on the water. So it was part of my childhood, be it, either the Atlantic Ocean or like canals and canoes and boats. And so I was a water person. I still am to a degree, although I connect with deserts and mountains and other spaces. I found that definitely water is a real thing for me, and it always kind of grounds me in an interesting way. So that's probably a big part of it. And I think, though, there is this thing with the ocean. I ask the ocean for help. I see it as this like enormous entity that's like at my disposal and I'm connected to. And so I feel very like it's like it holds a space for me that's very therapeutic.
Well, if we compare the lyrics of Focus to Traced in Air, there are three major differences that we wanted to kind of unpack and talk about a little bit because they're quite interesting and curious. So right from the start, Focus features a large amount of rhyme. So the first lines of Veil of Maya begin with, in Maya's grip, illusion transforms verity, perceiving thus a delusive world of duality, with 6 rhyming couplets across the song. While some tracks like Celestial Voyage have no rhyme, it's pretty common across the album still, with the Eagle Nature beginning with learning, discerning, or the couplet, freedom and reason shine through, paddle upon the clouds, one's own canoe. On How Could I, in contrast, the first song on Traced in Air has just one rhyme, so Traced in Air, Captain's Chair. And we counted only 2 other rhymes on the album, so never more than 1 per song, it seems. Can you think, of anything that might have caused this pull away from the rhyming structure?
That's interesting. I didn't even know that.
Game to surprise.
Yeah. It's like when I think about the process of coming to a song and how it can be really messy, right? It's like notebooks of pulling from a pool of ideas and going through layers and layers of writing and rewriting and trying to get to the essence of something, trying to kind of figure out what the root of this song is. And so much of it is just getting out of one's own way. It's like, it's not an intellectual process. So when you say rhyming or not rhyming, it's like, I don't even think about that. I'm just thinking about how do I convey something that captures the space to say what this song needs, and right. To do it in the most authentic way possible. Like, I mean, it's again, these are like, it's like you're getting me in a place where I'm trying to intellectualize it. And I don't do that when I'm in the process. I'm very much in this like almost abstract kind of flow state, right? Where you're just trying to kind of make a piece of art that feels authentic and genuine and real. So I never even thought about that with Traced in Air. That's really interesting that it's not rhymey. But now thinking about songs, I'm thinking of lyrics. I'm like, oh yeah, there's not a whole lot going on there. I like rhymes. It's nothing against rhymes, okay. Rhymes are cool. I think again, it's just kind of it's whatever this thing needs, right? It's like, I'm not sure where that comes from in terms of other than just trying to, again, capture something that feels right at that time. And how much I have to do with that, I'm not sure, actually.
Well, this next question might get a similar answer then, but just we'll pop it out there just in case. If we're over intellectualizing, just let us know. Yeah. But another thing that we noticed that was quite different is that the use of language on Focus feels a bit different in the terms of the number of large multisyllabic sequences. Like Focus has words like uruboric and large multisyllabic sequences like unconditional omnipotence or unfocused consciousness. And there's also like the use of some kind of ye olde language, like the use of thy instead of your. In contrast, the only word more than 2 syllables long on the song, the space for this is disassembling. And you have lines like, I touch the string through the harp, though the harp may not sing, still I dig the sky for the sun's sparks to guide, which are pretty much entirely monosyllabic. Did something potentially happen that kind of moved you away from these larger words towards kind of the more shorter syllable, I guess, commonplace vocabulary?
I guess maybe like getting better at writing more condensed songs. And I think the Traced in Air, I was better at arrangement, the art of arrangement. I feel like I had spent years with my other group, Eon Spoke, and just kind of after Focus, really, I went into this like return to childhood, trying to write like simple folk songs, because I found that to be really challenging. So I was really trying to kind of strip things back. And I think that kind of lent itself to Traced in Air, where it was more kind of just pure and simple, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I guess like it kind of makes sense in the way that when I think of the arrangements of Trace Dinaire, there was like, it was one of those albums where it's incredibly dense, yet it's really short still. And that's like a real trick that I've been interested in, that, you know, musicians can do. They can write these songs that when you listen to it, it feels really like so much just happened. And then you look and it was like 3.5 minutes.
Yeah.
And that's not common in especially like prog and progressive music, which tends to have these extended, elaborate sections and long guitar solos and breakdowns. And so it was like I was interested in like making it really tight and keeping it very compact and just like direct and stuff. So I think a lot of like, they call it trimming the fat, you know, in an arrangement, like you're just taking out any excess and just trying to distill this work to like its root. And it's so funny because a lot of people that aren't in progressive music will hear a record like that and just think it's this crazy, layered, insane work. But to a band like us, it was like, wow, this is so much more simple and, you know, like direct. And then, for example, if you go further along, like Ascension Codes, which it's so dense, you know, it's like a whole, like there's just a lot going on there. So yeah, I think that might be what it is coming out of the Eon Spoke stuff and the kind of songwriting I was into and just being really bare bones. It kind of trickled into the lyrical approach, maybe to a degree, in terms of how it broke down, I guess, syllabically and stuff.
Mm. Well, other lyricists that we've spoken to have had a similar kind of long career, have said that, you know, if they have tended to use more kind of multi-sided complex vocabulary in their earlier years, then in their later years they shifted towards kind of quote unquote simpler language because they felt that their initial use of that kind of more complex vocabulary was more brought forth through like pressure to make, you know, quote unquote good song lyrics than because, you know, they really needed to be using that kind of language. And so, you know, we've spoken to people like Freddie Lim, for instance, who said that, like, you know, back in the 90s when he was first writing songs for Sonic and stuff, he felt that he had to have these really highbrow lyrics, and so used quite, you know, obscure, you know, technical vocabulary. But then, you know, when he got older and, as he says, like, you know, more mature, he kind of realized he didn't really need to do that to, you know, make something sound profound and interesting. Do you kind of resonate with that at all, or is that not really a consideration for you through your development?
Totally. I can relate to that. Like, it feels like we're all trying to distill and get simpler and simpler and reduce it to like, how do you get to this root thing? And it's a real complex environment for a band like Cynic because it's inherently layered and progressive music. So it's like, how do you get it more bare bones, but also keep that interest that is so part of, you know, kind of in my biology, to kind of keep it layered and textural. But yeah, I think also now realizing, like with Trace Dinaire, all those songs started on acoustic guitar. So I was actually singing and playing them like in a singer-songwriter way before they got transferred to like a Cynic arrangement. And I think that's part of it. As to where focus, I was on a keyboard writing vocoder parts, you know, like it was different. It was more of like thinking like an instrument, and then the growls, as to where Traced was more just like, it was just a more simplistic approach to melody. So that probably is part of it too, is like coming from that songwriter approach with the roots of the songs and what was coming out of my, like I was writing melodies based on what I was hearing and singing with the guitar, rather than like sitting at a keyboard and figuring out unorthodox things, right? So I think that's part of it too, is the kind of the functionality of how the songs were written. Focus was a lot of 4 guys in a room yelling at each other. my riff, my part. And I remember I was always like, man, like we have to be in service to the song. Fuck your part, you know, like, like let's think about the arrangement. Like, what does this song need? Like, who cares about you? You know, like, let's just it's about like that. And I think that was a really interesting transitional space for us as young musicians to get out of ego, because we had some brevity as young aspiring musicians with some skill and technique. We want to show off what we got, and you're just like, so you kind of want to really prove yourself. And it was that balance of like, no, there's nothing to prove, like just less is more. So it's, and this is, I think time really teaches one that as an artist, that when you do develop a certain degree of skill, how do you say all that with less? It's really, that's the ultimate challenge, really, and because you can say it all with less. It's just, and oftentimes it translates better, it communicates more, because it's not as it just depends. It depends on what you're going for. I'm not making it good or bad, but I do feel like there is that thing of, especially early 20s, where we were just like, oh, we can shred, let's prove ourselves. But that's not, it's like, wait, that's not what makes a song great. That's not interesting. And you think of all those albums with endless shredding and how they're just, no one cares about them anymore, And I think about, I'm glad we got into that space around focus, because I don't know that people would care about focus 30 years later had we not been thinking about reining in an arrangement to a degree and thinking about the essence of the song rather than just wanking on our instrument, but there is, it's funny, like I think for a straightforward, straight ahead metal person that grew up listening to just like Metallica and variations of more straightforward metal, Cynic is still this weird outside the box band that sounds really busy, really complex. Like there's a learning curve to kind of hearing a Cynic song. And to me and to us, it was like the catchiest thing ever. It's like, it's so accessible, but we're used to this stuff. We're in it. It's like, we have no perspective. So, and we've been living in these arrangements in this music for so long that it becomes really familiar. So I always tell that to like a new person that's hearing our music. I just say, keep listening. There's a curve. It's like, once you get it, you'll get it, but it might not be that, it's not that familiar at first, because the reference points aren't the same. We're not playing that thing that you have to kind of get into the language of Cynic, which is its own weird hybrid.
So speaking of this concept of like changing perspectives on the ego, the last kind of difference we noted between the first two albums is that on Focus, there are 20 uses of we, but split across only 3 of the 7 tracks that have lyrics, 20 uses of I and 6 uses of we. In contrast, Traced in Air features 37 uses of I and 25 uses of we, with every song having at least one of these words. So quite an increase. Do you know what might have inspired the increased use of the first and especially the collective perspective between the two albums?
So there was more uses of we on Focus, you're saying?
No, Focus had 20 I's and 6 we's. Traced in Air had 37 I's and 25 we's. So almost like 3 to 4 times more on Traced in Air.
Maybe that's a sign of spiritual progress. I don't know. I mean, it's funny. It's like, we're always writing about ourselves to a degree, they'll say. So like every song you're writing is some aspect of your own experience, right? But I think also, having done so much work with psychedelics and also, deeper meditation practice, you start to like realize how everything's connected. You start to see the greater whole, and start to see reality more as interconnected rather than like fragmented as an individual and a separate self. So maybe that's why I'm saying, like, maybe there is some degree of progress there in that, seeing things as us and we rather than I. I love that. Like, I think in South Africa, they'll answer questions like, if you ask, how are you doing? They'll be like, we're doing well. And when you say we, you're speaking for the people around you, your family, your friends. You're always referencing your life from a collective perspective, which I think is extremely evolved, to speak from the we, because it's a reminder that we're all together, that we're all in this. And And, if you look at the root of depression and the root of all that stuff that I know very well, it was generally rooted in an I complex. Me, my little world, my problems, my stuff. And the practice, especially like, for example, in Buddhism, is that you use that as an opportunity to realize when you feel the heaviness of depression and sadness, use it as an opportunity to realize that you're not alone, that actually this is what a lot of people feel, and that we're all kind of in the same boat. So it's a way of getting out of your stuff, getting out of your story, and connecting with the greater whole, which is the true nature of reality, is that we aren't separate on a quantum level. We are all one. We are like molecularly just like one organism. So it's interesting to kind of deconstruct things. And I think psychedelics help you see that very quickly, because you have to kind of, the ego gets annihilated,
Mm-hmm.
You a couple cups of strong ayahuasca and there's no I mean, and LSD, which I was involved in at a young age. But it's interesting. I mean, it really blows you open. There's like, who am I? And I think people who go on bad trips are holding on, because they identify with themselves so much, they don't know how to let go. But if you can just kind of dissolve into there's no one here, then you relax into that. It's very similar. It's a parallel state to what's happened in advanced meditation states and stuff, where you start to see things as they are, which is there's no more self. It's all kind of happening and isness. And you know what I mean? This kind of non-dual perspective, which I really connect with. So maybe it's gone further into that. I'd like to think. I wonder how many we's and I's are in ascension codes. Did you guys?
Yes, that's coming. Yes.
Before we get to that, though, we did want to talk about kind of one source of continuity, I suppose, between focus and trace snare is in references to Vedic ideas and phrases, such as Om Shrim Maha Lakshmi Shwama Om of the Unknown Guest, which is a mantra to Lakshmi, the goddess of wealth. But you also have your first uses of Latin on trace snare in the pair Nunc Fluens and Nunc Stans. Flowing Now, Abiding Now, which respectively open and close the album. So we were wondering what inspired this stretching beyond English and drawing on other non-English languages?
I think I was like, I think the Om Shri Maha Lakshmi Ye Swaha Om was like, a certain yoga teacher friends were doing it at the end of their classes, like a certain prayer. And I was just trying to pay my rent that month. And I was like, okay, this makes sense in this song. I mean, it was something like that. There was a direct reference point to like, holy shit, I'm tight right now. I don't have any money. And maybe I expect this answer. This mantra, And so it was because I think there's like penniless in the lyrics. There's like, that's like the second verse or something in reverse. And then I do a reverse scale. I don't know if you noticed that, but there's like very literal things where the music is completely referencing what the words are saying. So yeah, there was some of that, it was like using kind of the power of these charged mantric words, these bishas, these seed sounds that if you say them wholeheartedly and mean them, they apparently work. And so I think there was some of that going on. And there was also this, like, because I'm beginning to think of a certain friend who I was doing a lot of yoga with, who was doing a Lakshmi kind of prayer at the end of the class. And I was like, I must have like nabbed that. I was like, oh yeah, that, like I'm tight financially. And it's like things, but it's funny, the Unknown Guest for me, I remember that whole arrangement happened to me walking. Like I literally figured out the whole song walking around LA. Like I was like, it was a whole thing where I had to kind of, it was like a puzzle, and it suddenly like I got it. And then I got back home, grabbed my guitar, and I was like, there it is, So it's like one of those tunes that happened as a result of being away from the instrument. And what was the other song you were mentioning?
Well, just the use of Latin, like, I mean,
Yeah.
broadly speaking,
Oh,
you've
yeah.
kind of opened this question up. No album that you've made has been completely in English. Like every single album has some instance of a non-English language in there. Is there
Mhm.
any broad intentionality towards branching out of English in your music? Is there like a meaning behind not focusing on one language?
I mean, I'm curious about these things, and I think it just comes natural to kind of explore that stuff, especially in the realm of lyric writing, because it's essentially sounds we're making with these words. So how can I kind of utter new sounds using these different languages, right? It's kind of like, to me, it's all like variations on like the same way that you can do interesting bends and scales as a musician with your guitar or an instrument. So why not explore that lyrically, right? So kind of, because the essence is still there. It's just kind of, so I think I'm just curious about that stuff. It speaks to me. I mean, I actually have a friend I was talking about doing a collab with, a record with, where I was just going to do all just like kind of light languagey type sounds, which is a lot of what's on Ascension Codes. I was like, I just want to do a light language record. That's just those essences, because they feel so pure. I don't know how to put it, but there's something really pure about them. And it's like you think about like a Sigur Ross or something, Sigur Rós, that who just like was making these sounds, right? And you can even look at the first Obituary record. Tardy wasn't singing lyrics; he was just making sounds, and so it's kind of like you're evoking a feeling rather than, and it's almost the same thing at that point, right?
Yeah.
Well, how about like drawing on like particular like forms and phrases and stuff from different languages that are also connected to particular kind of spiritual orientations? Because if you look at like nunc stans, the Latin phrase we mentioned earlier, like that's apparently a term in Christianity, as Augustine and Aquinas like use the term to place God outside of time. Like, are you like, I suppose, when you're kind of selecting forms from languages other than English, are you kind of cognizant of like their connection to these kind of religious observances?
To a degree, yeah. I mean, the nunc fluens, nunc stans thing, I think, has that Latin root, right? And it's like passing present into the eternal present or something like that. It's like, I think there's some sentence that breaks it down. And I actually just like the shape of those words, like how they just look written down. It was just had this like symmetry to it. And it just felt like, oh, there's the bookends, and it was like, and we knew we had this like introduction to the record that was, because the thing with Influence is that it holds the whole record in it. It's like all of those, that whole like wall of sound that's happening in the beginning of that song, of that album, is actually taken from everything in the album itself. So there's clips and moments from the entire album that are kind of layered into that wall. So it was just kind of like, here's the whole record in this weird little intro piece, and now we break it down. And then the end was kind of the distillation of just this very kind of it was really about impermanence, right? Nunc stans is just like the nature of all things ending. And so it felt like, at least in this realm, right? Because it's like things really end, right? So, but yeah, I mean, I do my research and I geek out and like write about, try and understand the roots of all this stuff. But at the end of the day, I think it's more about a feeling space and what it captures as an essence rather than being too literal.
So to move now to kindly bent to free us, here's the pronoun question that you were asking about. So kindly bent to free us continues the use of I. There are 37 I's on kindly bent, but there's much less we. We're down to just 4, and there's a sudden influx of you. So across both your first 2 albums, there are 13 uses of you in total. In contrast, on kindly bent, there are 21 uses of you in that album alone. What might have brought this change towards a focus on the second person perspective and a dropping of we?
Wow, these are tricky questions. You guys really broke it down. Kindly for me, I'm trying to think of like the time and place of Kindly. So I had, we did carbon-based anatomy. Sean and I had moved into a house together, my drummer, and we were kind of both in this major transition. I had come out of what was my longest intimate relationship, like a singular with one partner. I have lots of intimate relationships, but that one where I was with one person. And then Sean had come out of one, and we moved into a house together. It was the first time we had lived together in like a decade or something. And it was kind of like us trying to take care of each other. Mm-hmm. And I remember he had a lot of hardship before he moved in with me. Like his credit was destroyed, and like, just a lot of stuff was going on for him and for me. But I was really showing up for a friend. I was really trying to and it became this thing where it was like, I think the record it was all about stripping things back and trying to kind of get very raw. And like we had, Malone, it was just the three of us. And we had this very raw trio kind of feeling. So we went very like, almost like a demo. It felt like a demo, it was like trying to break the rules. Like I remember like I was thinking, I'm not going to play riffs that are characteristically Cynic. I was trying to I think there's like maybe one song that has a Cynic-y riff, but the rest is like a whole new approach. So I was really trying to kind of deconstruct and get out of these boxes, because Trace Denier already kind of still had the focus language, but took it somewhere else. And then, so Kindly was about dismantling all of that, and in a very punk way. And so the lyrics, I think, also kind of held that. It was just like, I'm trying to think of like, I think of Lion's Roar. I think of True Hallucination Speak, you better get a friend to help you. It's like all these lyrics it's like, there's a lot of that, like speaking about trying to, I'm thinking about each song, like I go through each of the tunes, and there's definitely like a lot of that, like an external kind of thing of reaching out. And I was also coming off of, actually, because carbon-based anatomy, I was doing a lot of I had done a lot of intense work with the terminally ill, and I had gone carbon, and then Kindly kind of went into this whole thing where we were, it was just a distillation. So I don't know. Again, it's almost like reflective of life and where we were and what was happening. And at the same time, just again, trying to I think about the cover of Kindly Bent was this Venosa painting. It was called Atomic Blossom, which kind of represented the mind. It's like a big brain, but also a nuclear explosion, but also a tree. And so it was like, there was a lot of mind stuff on the record, infinite shapes, these ideas of how the mind can play tricks on you and you can't trust your thoughts. So there was all that stuff. So I was almost like observing other or something, like who are you? What is this thing? So I think if you broke down each song, because I know the record had this kind of beginning, middle, and end for me, but there was, for example, Gitanjali. Gitanjali was inspired by, I found this book of poetry by this young Indian girl who died of cancer. She was almost like an Emily Dickinson in that she wrote them all and they found them all after, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And she was given the name, what was her name? I think her name was Gitanjali, and which was like a Rabindranath Tagore poem or something, like one of the great Indian poets. So she had this weird association with an incarnation of a great Indian poet. And she literally came onto this earth. She wrote all this incredible book of poetry. And then she split, she died, I think in her teens, maybe, or she was younger. Mm. So there was moments like that where I was pulling from different things and inspired by different people's stories and lives. So I don't know that I can literally say why, when you ask that. Mm-hmm. Other than that, I just have to start thinking about songs and how they relate to what you're saying.
did they ever were you ever kind of reaching out for or addressing a particular person? Like when you say things in your lyrics like, don't you worry now, goodbye to all of you, from your throat you sing to me your secrets, you've got to make amends with the truth, or behold what you're afraid to see. Like, is there a specific individual you have in mind in those instances?
I think, again, it's like we're always speaking to ourselves to a degree, right? It's like these are all prayers to the self. But yes, a lot of times it gets externalized. It's easier to put it on someone else because sometimes it's too difficult to look in the mirror at that stuff, right? So I think, yeah, probably there was a direct relationship to someone else in the sense as I was writing it, maybe. But ultimately, now hearing you say those things, I'm like, oh my God, that was all my stuff. It was like all stuff I was in. And at the same time, it's like, it's interesting. I think I was raised by therapists. My mother put me in therapy at a very young age. So I was put in these rooms with people asking me questions since I was like fucking 8, and taking Rorschach tests and all this stuff. And I found I was always like, who the hell, like, what is this? Like, what is this whole, what are we doing? I eventually, I think I got to the point where I was like, oh, wait a second, like, this is my journey. Like, I can't blame others. It's not their fault. It's not, it's like you start to take responsibility for your life and you start to, your mind is at the root of all of this, right? So it was a liberating place to access, to realize that it was like, it has nothing to do with them. Like, it's how I perceive, it's how I meet this stuff. That's the real thing at work, right? So it was, I think that that's always at play. And all this stuff, it's like this objective thing that's observing, but at the same time, like dealing with some immediate sense of what's going on in one's life. And again, it's a tricky environment as a kid that was raised in this psychological environment, because I could play with that. I was never caught up. I could be the observer and at the same time step into it. And it was like, that's why, like, when I would take psychedelics, I was like home. I was like, oh yeah, this is how things work. It never felt disorienting, to take a lot of psychedelics. It always felt very familiar to me. And I think it's very similar to the states of mind that we access when we look inward deep enough. It's all the same. All these places merge. Am I making sense?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
totally.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, our last question for a while kindly went to free us is related to some of the thematic overlaps, thematic choices, because there are some overlaps with references to like liquids, as in trapped in ice or keep swimming, but there's a large increase in references to animals. You discuss lions, DNA, fossils, evolution, goose eggs, self-transcending simians, a tentacle-growing limb-like legs, paper tigers, embryonic wisdom, melting in cocoons, and most direct is perhaps the line, animals are something invented by plants to move seeds around from the lion's roar. How did this focus come about? Why discuss living creatures now instead of kind of the broader natural or interstellar phenomenon that dominated the prior releases?
Well, let me say that quote, the animals are something invented by plants to move seeds around, is Terence McKenna.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote a book called Food of the Gods, among other books. And he's like the original psychonaut. I mean, there's other people, but he's like the great master that a lot of us adhere to. And I saw him speak in high school, actually. And he blew my mind open. He was just one of these people that just was, everything was like a metaphor and a poem, and it was genius. And now you're reminding me, like, and I was living with a dog at the time. And I've always been an animal person, and I've been vegetarian since 1989. I've been vegan for 20 years, so I feel connected to animals. And it's interesting that it took that long to bring them into the lyrics, in a sense, because I feel very protective of animals. I feel like it's our duty to not exploit them. It's like, it's one of those things where, and I'm not like a militant vegan, I don't judge, but I do think it's like, it's the fact that that we can dominate them is why we have to protect them. It's, you know, the fact that, like, we should not be exploiting something we can dominate. It's our duty to protect these things, not, you know. So, and that's a very logical idea to me. It's like, of course, like, why would you? But you know, of course, we have all these new layers of you know, how that point of view is brought out with plants and plants having a consciousness and all that. But I think the view with a lot of this stuff, and it's rooted in a lot of old spiritual traditions, is sentient creatures that have a nervous system and actually feel pain. But then again, plants may feel it on some subtle level that we can't detect because they're vibrating at such a slow frequency. Like you think trees, you know, I mean, there was a guy named Luther Burbank that said trees are like, they feel more than humans, but it's so slow that you don't even realize how sensitive they are, which is incredible, you know. That's why I'm like, okay, so I guess we shouldn't eat anything. I mean, maybe what's that called us where they get, you know, there was actually stories of yogis, and there's some few people alive that are still practicing, and they extract energy and food from the sun, and they can actually turn it into food.
Like photosynthesis kind of thing.
It's like you're literally like a plant person that can kind of extract from the sun and make it like where you're healthy. And there's people, I don't know I can't remember the name of it, but it's pretty cool. Like, I mean, I feel like there's probably some weird futuristic ET race that already does that. They're just like extracting from the air. You know what I mean? It's like they figured out how to extract water from the air, which could like solve, you know, all the stuff that's going on with water, you know, which is pretty cool. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, I think the animal stuff, maybe it was just I want to say, oh, I was living with a dog, you know, me and my boyfriend at the time had this adorable Australian shepherd dog named Cookie. And she was so sweet, and it was kind of part of my life. But I always had cats before that and other dogs. And so but I don't know. I think, again, it's like maybe there was this earthiness about Kindly Bent to Free Us in relationship to the tree and the cover image. And it was like kind of an earth record in a way. It was like grounded, you know, and earth related. And so I think a lot of the themes were born out of that: earth creatures, earth experiences, earth mind, very human in a sense.
Well, then shifting towards your most recent albums, so 2021's Ascension Codes that we were talking about earlier, there's a large number of tracks with no lyrics at all. So you basically go on as you know, bare bones as possible, as we were saying earlier, or, you know, at the most there's like one line of lyrics. So what inspired the Codes approach is just an extension of what we were talking about earlier, like, you know, wanting to kind of like simplify things down as much as possible.
Yeah, I feel Ascension Codes was really coming out of, it was a record that had been a work in progress essentially since 2015. Right after Kindly Bent, those ideas were already gestating. Some of those lyrics were gestating. And then things happened. Life happened, split with my drummer. The two guys die in 2020. A lot of life happened. And I think I was also, and I still am, but I'm deeply interested and obsessed with extraterrestrial stuff. I mean, just like completely immersed in that world. And I got really deep into all the facets of that world. And there's a lady named Anrita Melchizedek who I love. She's actually South African, and she does these beautiful meditations, and she's a channeler of like a whole legion of extraterrestrials. And she's the person that opens and closes the record. So it's her voice, like speaking this light language stuff, which I was, and I still am, kind of obsessed with that space, which is communicating this sense of ease and openness and wisdom, but without using human words. It's like a energy. And so that kind of, I think it was me reaching for something that was more, it was like, what's the most, I'll tell you what it is. I do these meditation practices, and I got really into attachment theory practices, and there's certain deity practices in Tibetan Buddhism where you envision, like, for example, an advanced being or a Buddha in front of you, and you embody their characteristics. So their characteristics will kind of come out of their head, or however you want to see it coming into your head. And I had, all these practices I've been doing with basically groups of extraterrestrials that will be in front of me, like a family of them that are feeding me and giving me a sense of like relief and ease and courage to move forward in my life. It's like these spiritual practices to kind of be in the world. And it's almost like you're putting this thing in front of you and then embodying it. So it's like a trick that you play with your mind in order to kind of move through experience. But what's interesting is that they work. And I don't know what's real or what isn't in that sense, other than that's what I've been practicing for a long time. And Ascension Codes really embodies that essence of like being in a relationship with an extraterrestrial family, and you could say it's a coping mechanism, but it's actually a very courageous approach to reality for me, because I'm not hiding behind anything. They're feeding me, but it's essentially me feeding myself, right? But I'm using this like connection to these beings as a way to kind of move forward in my life. And I had to pick up the pieces from the most incredible hardship I'd ever been in. I lost 2 lifelong friends, and in the most tragic of circumstances. And so it was like a real watershed for me, that whole situation. And these were my bookends to 2020. You look at 2020 collectively as a species, and then you look at and I'm not to say my 2020, but for me, it was beyond what was happening collectively, which was incredible. And I was so empathetic to the suffering everyone was experiencing collectively, or whatever the psyop that appeared as. But also I was experiencing my own direct trauma of losing these people in my life. And I had never known grief on that level. I've lost friends, I've lost acquaintances, I've lost family members, but this was like people I forged my identity with and made art with, and really had never been more naked and raw and real with. Like we were completely one organism for so many years. So when that all kind of went down, I was in the middle of this record, and I literally was like, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I'm doing. And I really went to this. And this is interesting that you're asking, because I'm realizing now it was those practices that kind of pulled me out of it and gave me the courage to kind of move forward and finish this record. And so it was very much informed by these beings, these extraterrestrials that I still see. Like, I mean, I still am so connected to them, and I still do these practices every day. So it's kind of where I'm at right now in terms of how I'm connecting with art and how it appears to me. So that record became very much fueled by this space, which wasn't necessarily words. It was an energy and a frequency, and that frequency is beyond words. And so it was almost like its own realm of space that was just trying to, and I also realized music can say so much, right? Like, I mean, instrumental music captures phrases, and a lot of Cynic's music where there aren't words, there's a melody adding a sentence. Do you know what I mean? It's just adding a musical sentence. So there's a lot of that interplay going on Ascension Codes, where the music is taking the place of all the words, all the singing, and just kind of acting more subtle and subdued and mysterious, like it's more of an energy.
So given the sort of unique experiences and unique situation that was centered around this album, we want to ask our final question about pronouns, in that this album only has 4 uses of you, which drops the kind of focus on the second person that was taken on Kindly Bent. Does this relate to the stories you've told us so far, or do you know why you might have shied away from the you perspective?
That's interesting. No, I've never thought about it that way. I don't ever think of the yous or the I's. I mean, again, it's like from a non-dual perspective, there is no, it's all one, and all like they're all reflections of the same thing. So you is I is you, we are one. Kind of, it's all kind of a big pool of isness. And depending on the context of the song, it could just be a matter of what was more syllabic or made more sense in terms of the context. But there are songs that felt more we in terms of trying to speak more in a collective sense. But yeah, I don't really know about being deliberate about that in terms of thinking very specifically. It's, again, it's more of a feeling space and just going with what that sensation evokes in the context of this arrangement, of this music, of this art, you know, because they're all like merging into one organism. It's trying to kind of make it as seamless as possible. So I don't really know if I can kind of break it down in that way. Like, it's so interesting because you guys are getting me to try and intellectualize something that I've never really, I don't do that with it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't think about things in a literal way. It's more of a space that I'm inhabiting. And then it's just like, what feels the most accurate to kind of, to capture that space. So, but now you got me thinking, and I would love to kind of get your feedback. I mean, your report, your notes, because I'm like, I'm curious to go look at the songs and be like, why did I do that? Maybe I shouldn't. It might drive me crazy, but there's a part of me that's really curious because from a psychological perspective, there's a lot there, perhaps. You know, it's like there's something going on that's interesting, right? Or not, but.
Well, you never know. Like I was not expecting, you know, I had rent to pay as an answer to any of these. So it's interesting to go to. We approach the questions as if there is some kind of hidden meaning, just in the fact that produces an interesting answer. But you know, just cause, or I wasn't thinking about it, is fine. You know, not everything is intentional, but
yeah. I mean, I interviewed an interview today. I did an interview like by email for a magazine from Latin America, and they said, you know, what's the meaning behind you coming back and making ascension codes? And of course, my first response was, does there need to be meaning to make art? Like, we just make it. We don't, I love music. I love making music. I love the process of making things. So it doesn't have to have a purpose. It's just, I do it because that's what I do. It's like, there is no goal. It's just a way of existing in the world and offering something, you know, it's like, this is my offering, right? So it's a way of being rather than like thinking, oh, I'm doing this because I'm trying to change something or make a difference. And no, I'm just showing up for a process. Like, I don't have a lot of skills. This is one of the few I got. So I'm just trying to show up for it, you know? I'm like, oh yeah, I make jewelry too, which is kind of fun, but it's like, you know, I feel like it's just about a sheer love of music without it having to go anywhere or mean anything. And isn't that enough, you know, to just make something because it feels right? I mean, I think so. I mean, that for me is how it feels, but.
Sure. Yeah. So we only have one more question where we're going to try to find intentionality. So we'll, you know, again, if it's just cause we're getting right to the end to wrap things up here, but we want to talk about one absence in your lyrics, which is swearing. If there's not a single swear word on any of your releases, except if we go way, way back to your first demos, you have the line, "These answers keep fucking with me" from 1990, and "Attempts to tell us about their gimmick is so damn absurd" from 1989's Reflections of a Dying World. You've sworn during this interview, which is fine. This is, you know, not a podcast for children, but you know, there is this kind of absence, except for those demos, of any kind of swearing, even way back when you were, you know, touring with Cannibal Corpse, etc., who are known for at least a few, you know, swear words. Why have you avoided swearing in your lyrics from basically day one? Was there a perspective switch between like 1990 and 1993 that has stuck with you all this time?
Well, those early days, especially, I was more in a rebellious mindset. I'm still rebellious. I'm still a punk, but I was like, fuck the world, punk. You know what I mean? Like, I was really angry. And I think anger is an incredibly juicy energy that I've learned how to use differently. I can make beautiful things out of anger now. It's not so literal. So the anger kind of expresses itself differently and isn't so like, the middle finger type of anger. So again, it's just, maybe it's a maturation of stuff, but I curse all the time in everyday life. I'm like, I'm a sailor mouth person. I mean, I'm not that bad, but I like using curse words for emphasis. It feels natural to me. And I don't have any like shame or weirdness about it, so it's, but I don't know, I guess with lyrics, it just, I think there's some in maybe the acoustic stuff here and there, but I don't know. I guess it just hasn't presented itself. I mean, for me, Cynic is such a extraterrestrial frequency. It's so like weirdly disembodied and yet highly embodied. And like, it's this weird kind of entity that comes through and, and again, this Ascension Codes thing can kind of be connected to all of the records to a degree. It's just gotten more precise in a way with Ascension Codes. But if I look at all of Focus, and I mean, all of Cynic's trajectory, starting with Focus, and I remember when we finished Focus, like having some space around it and then hearing it, like as if, I don't know if you've had this happen with your own work where you hear someone else's music, or if you write music, like it's a beautiful thing for a musician to have this, where you hear your music in another room and you don't know it's yours. And it's like, I've had that happen and it happened with Focus, where it was like, wow, what is this shit? Like, who wrote this stuff? And it was really cool because it was like, I liked it. I thought it was cool, but at the same time, it was like, I totally heard it as someone else's music. And I think that's true with a lot of this work. It feels, so maybe, the goal with Cynic, if there was a goal, is to approach things with some degree of higher vibration, bringing some meaning. Again, I've just annihilated that idea, but I'm going to go full circle now and contradict myself and say, I do feel I want to raise the bar. I want to bring something meaningful and useful into the world as an artist. I want to offer some insights based on whatever I've experienced to a degree. I mean, but then again, those insights can come from incredible suffering. So it's not necessarily about being high-minded as much as just being authentic. And so it can present itself, though, in the realm of extraterrestrials and weird stuff and progressive music. But it does feel like coming full circle with this first idea that we talked about, which is trying to offer something new, right? To be fresh, to be original, to have a new take to take your influences and bring something new to the table. I love that idea. And I feel like that has always been what I'm aspiring to bring something new, to do something different, to get out of my comfort zone. And it's too easy to repeat yourself. That's kind of boring. That's the death of art. I mean, and I see a lot of artists do that. They just find their thing and they build variations on a theme with record after record. Even writers will do that. They find their voice and they just kind of replicate it. And that to me isn't interesting. What's interesting is getting out of your comfort zone constantly and creating something new and pushing yourself out of your safety to just bring something out that might be an offering to the world. So yeah, it's cool to think about things that way, to think without actually bringing any specialness to it, because, give it enough time will pass and no one will remember Cynic too. I mean, even everything is eventually forgotten. The passage of time is merciless. It doesn't. So you can't get too caught up in thinking any of this is very special, but it's kind of cool to think maybe it helped someone along the way, that you offered something useful. And I always get off on that a little bit. I hear people all the time saying, your music helped me through this experience. It helped me through this time in my life. And I think, fuck yeah, that's cool. Oh, because music did that for me.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Writers did that for me. So I'm like all about that. I'm like, that's cool. I mean, that's great. That's like, that's good to hear that it's actually doing something useful, right?
It's just funny to hear you talking about not swearing and then the sudden fuck yeah coming up at the end of that discussion. I just had a bit amused by the contrast there.
Well, as we mentioned earlier, you have one of the longest careers of anyone that we've spoken to thus far on the podcast. So before we move to our final question, we just wanted to kind of tie everything together that we've been talking about and ask you, like, as a whole, what do you think is the biggest difference in how you approach metal language today and, metal lyric writing more broadly compared to when you first started? And, is there any kind of source of continuity in your approach since, the very late 80s to now?
I definitely hear the continuity in the music because I can hear, as much as I think I'm getting out of my boxes and pushing constantly, and to a degree we are. I mean, this has been, some would argue that it's the curse of Cynic, is that we don't stay in the same place. We constantly are reinventing ourselves. And you always have these fans that want you to stay in that record. Like, we literally have people that they say we lost them at Focus. They're into the demos. I'm like, oh my God. Like, Focus is when we actually felt like we had a sense of an identity in terms of a real, we came into a voice, right? It was a realized voice. And then every record after that was just like kind of pushing that into new places. But lyrically, I suppose so. This going full circle, there's always been some degree of kind of looking inward and posing questions about what it is to be alive and who we are and what are we doing here, and trying to take a deeper look at life. And I've always been like that. I had my more punk rock roots, but I've always been an introspective, peculiar child, and it's kind of morphed into different things lyrically over the years. But I think that's kind of there's always that degree of like asking those questions and trying to look inward and trying to see what's going on, and using art as a vehicle to kind of explore that, right? It's like, I've been writing poems my whole life too. I've always been interested in words. I'm an avid reader. So I love language. I love kind of how you can, and it wasn't until I started to write myself, and I'm saying beyond lyrics, but just even writing, that I realized how incredible it is, like the vehicle of language, in terms of how precise it is to express things, and how one word can change the entire thing. You know what I mean? It's so, and the same is true with music. One note will change the whole feeling of a space, right? It's like from minor to major is a half step, right? If you're looking at a third, it's these kinds of things that are true in language. So I've been fascinated with all that stuff. And there's if you look at language in terms of a spiritual context, they say, it began with the word, right? And the word was vibration, it's sound. And how did we pass along wisdom and traditions? Through sound, through language, right? It's like, this is how we've learned as a species. So it's all like connected, right? It's all kind of all happening. And so I don't know that there's I would be curious, actually. You guys have more objectivity than I do at this point in terms of what this stuff is doing. I'm too close to it. I don't really, you know what I mean? I don't really know what the connective tissue is. I'm too I'm in it. It's like, even the music, I'm always like, what does this sound like to you guys? I say that to friends, like, what does this sound like? Because I don't know what it sounds like,
Right.
I can give you shapes and colors and ideas and maybe reference a genre or two, but at the end of the day, it's really hard to be objective with your own work. It's like, it's hard, and I think this is what we're always striving, is to kind of see it in that way. Maybe that's why I still take psychedelics. I don't know. I mean, it's like, sometimes I have that where, it's funny, like George Harrison would say that he found what was useful about weed when he was smoking weed in those Beatles days was that he would listen to a piece of music he finished, and he would be able to hear it from a different set of ears. So it kind of allowed him to get out of his ego, out of his kind of that whole closeness to the music and just hear it objectively, and then he could tweak things. And I get that, like it's kind of, you're always trying to step away. And I do that with lyrics. The lyric writing process for me is a lot of blah, and then editing and coming back and editing, and then you're just trying to like get it right, get the whole thing, the shape right. And it's so peculiar and odd till it feels right. And it's never easy. I will say that it's not an easy thing. It's like, I take the words as seriously as I do the music. It's like they go hand in hand. So it's all kind of, they're equally important. See what I mean? It's not like, oh, I got to get this done now. Like the words are like just as crucial in a sense. So yeah, it's all happening.
So I guess then you've touched on a lot of things that I think actually could answer this question already, but we like to finish by asking just if you were to take everything we've talked about and everything you've thought about with lyrics, what would you say ultimately is the role of lyrics in Cynic's art?
I mean, it's like, the extra-terrestrial in me says, oh, is to raise consciousness, to shed some light onto the world, to offer a different perspective perhaps to your own. And then there's this part of me that says, I don't know if there's actually like, do I need to kind of bring meaning and specialness to what this is? At the end of the day, I'm just in service to something beyond myself. I don't feel like there's a lot of me in that. Ultimately, it's just trying to just produce something that works. And I again, there's no like, it's out of love. This is what it's birthed out of. Like the root of it is love. And I think as long as my love of making music and being a musician is at the essence of this stuff, then I know I'm doing the right thing. Does that make sense? Like
Yeah.
Like as long as that's my
great answer.
Yeah. It's like that's really kind of the goal, is to just tell the truth and get to the bottom of this. And I think when you do that, you tell everyone's truth, because truth is universal. We're all connected. So the more you can kind of get to that essence, is the more people are going to relate to it, I suppose.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, we know you're in a bit of a hurry, so just want to say thank you so much. This has been fascinating.
Really enlightening.
Yeah. I'm so glad I didn't know where we were going with it. Awesome, because it's so different. I mean, this is a really cool discussion. I haven't had someone, you guys really went in there. It's really cool. So thank you.
Well, thank you for dealing with us picking apart everything and trying to find intentionality. It's
I really appreciate the effort there.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
Just fascinating. Thank you so much. This has been just an incredible honor and just such a interesting perspective on things. So really appreciate your time.
Definitely haven't heard before, which is
great. And I'm curious to learn more about what you guys do. So maybe we can have a separate discussion, or we'll WhatsApp it sometime.
Absolutely. Anytime. Anytime. Absolutely.
You're in Western Australia, is that?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm in Sydney.
Oh, you're in Sydney. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so 3 time zones makes it a little weird, but I mean, I'm anytime you want to chat, absolutely would love to.
Yeah, please.
Okay, I'll hit you up. I'll follow you up on that. I want to know more. So
cool. Sounds great.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
All right.
Well, thanks so much. Well, just before we let you go, is there any particular links you want us to include in our episode description?
You can put just, I think cyniconline.com or paulmasvidal.com. They're kind of like, at this point, just like, like trees with a bunch of links and hyperlinks.
Yeah.
Great.
But, either one, I think, leads to a bunch of band related stuff or whatever, that's all good.
Cool.
Okay.
So,
Cool.
yeah.
Great.
Easy. Thank
you.
you.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Be well, you guys.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Lingua Brutallica. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stay tuned for our next episode. Before we leave, we just wanted to acknowledge that this podcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay respects to their elders, past and present.